Announced on the 10th of June 2019, Chivalry 2 was off to a rocky start. Off the back of the massive success that was Mordhau, it wasn't exactly anyone's cup of tea at the time for something else that was kind of the same. Or at least we thought. You see, Mordhau came out in April of 2019. Then, just 2 months later, Chivalry 2 was announced. A coincidence? Yes, of course it was. That's not how game development works. Yet many fans in the first-person medieval slasher community saw it as an attempt to crawl back into the space after so many years since the first Chivalry game. Chivalry 2 was also announced to be solely Epic Games Store exclusive for the first year, especially back in 2019. This was the height of the Epic Games wrap-up, the company trying to find any title they could get their hands on to bring into their exclusivity business model. Chivalry 2 started development, however, back in 2017. Way before Mordhau had even been released. The combat would be similar to a bar fight more than a fencing match, as players could use whatever they find in the battlefield as their weapons. This became very clear in the later releases for Chivalry 2. There was much more of a focus on the casual, intense brawls rather than the long, slick skills duel fights that Mordhau tended to offer. This was a smart play that placed Chivalry 2 alongside Mordhau, rather than trying to push its competition off its pedestal, perhaps one of Torn Banner's best ideas. The main goal during the game development, though, was to increase its scale. The player count was significantly increased to 64 players in one game. The gameplay and the structure of the team objective modes now featured much bigger scale battles and full sieges, definitely inspired by the Game of Thrones and the Lord of the Rings of its day. The developers themselves described it as trying to create a fluid yet cinematic experience whilst keeping that casual fun element. The game itself took 4 more years of development before an open beta on the 27th of May 2021. Then they finally released Chivalry 2 on the Epic Games Store just a week later. Since Torn Banner's first outing with Chivalry Medieval Warfare, a lot had changed. Combat was improved to no end. It was way more fluid, and the ever-impressive weight of weaponry from the first game was once again enhanced for this sequel. Of course, the two main factions were back, the Mason Order and the Agathan Knights, loosely based on the York and Lancaster warring factions during the War of the Roses. So, what happened upon its release? Was it as negative as many people expected? Well, not quite. Chivalry 2 was actually incredibly well received by critics and players alike, falling in love with the slick yet massively gameplay focused nature of the title. There was a decent amount of maps ranging from open fields to city sieges, and of course the famous game modes were back, capturing peasants or freeing them and stopping their inevitable execution by the enemy team. Yet since the initial release of Chivalry 2, Torn Banner, the developers, came out stating that they were not done yet. The game was far from over. One of the biggest reveals was the Galencourt update. The update itself added in 2 new maps. The first being Courtyard, an open team deathmatch map with multiple levels and terrain to get yourself stuck in. This was more of a precursor to the main map being added within this update. This was the full Galencourt map, the biggest map we had seen in the game so far. A full siege of epic proportions, fighting outside the front gates, to on top of the walls with siege engines, ballista and towers, then heading on to attack and defend the ships in the port from the side. One team would try and blow them up as the other would, well, attempt to put the fuse out, but inevitably get blown to smithereens when it went off. Galencourt was big though. It was really big, but little did we know it wasn't the last. Fight Night came next, new weapons and armor. The rapier was added in, and boy was it a powerful stabby one. The update itself came along with Halloween, giving that spooky vibe running through the patch. But the real star of the show was the Brawl Mode. Players start in a feast as 2 men get into an argument before laying down their gauntlets for a slapping contest. No weapons, just you, your fists, and anything else in the room you could find. Chairs, candlesticks, small knives, loots, you name it. If you can see it, you can throw it at someone. The Christmas update came soon after, adding in beautiful Christmassy looks to the already implemented map. But let's be honest, it was bigger and better maps that everybody really wanted within the game. And that's where Aberfell came in. Aberfell brought in the mercenaries of Scotland into Chivalry 2. The map Raid on Aberfell saw a beautiful British highland, big goddamn swords perfect for the ripe decapitation of your foes, and of course the robbery of great British pigs, something that not even I could have predicted would be added into the game. Another big update, but it wasn't massive, until Tenosia. Tenosia has been the most recent of Chivalry 2's updates, and it is of course the biggest. An entirely new faction, the Tenosians, have been added in. New weaponry, armors, completely unique to anything that we've seen before, very much based on a more eastern look at the medieval world. 4 new maps, yes, you heard me, 4. And of course, beautiful new horses and cavalry combat. And despite Chivalry 2 coming out 2 years after the release of Mordhau, I think this Tennosia update, with all the content that came with it, including cavalry and maps and factions, has actually brought Chivalry 2 onto a similar playing field as Mordhau in terms of the content within the game. Okay, look, that's not entirely fair. Mordhau has been out for longer, yes, but Triturnion, who make Mordhau, are definitely not a bigger company. Chivalry 2's Torn Banner have been around for much longer and I'd assume have more resources, so their faster development time is kind of obvious. But it doesn't go without stating, there are many reasons that I don't think I need to go into why we're comparing Chivalry 2 and Mordhau here. But there's always been those complaints with Mordhau. Whilst it has such a big fan base and whilst it's such a well-refined and beautiful game, everyone's talking about content, how there is still a lack of content within that title. And Chivalry 2 isn't getting those same criticisms because of this really fast development time and these really solid updates. Tennosia for me was the cherry on top of the cake. Chivalry 2 was already an incredible title, not just gameplay wise, but now content wise as well. It's always tricky with a title like this to keep the multiplayer community active, and now with the Chivalry 2 release onto Steam as well and the extra content coming out faster than anyone ever expected, I think it only goes up from here. I think they only grow their fan base. I mean, they already sold 300,000 copies on Steam within the first week, which is not just impressive but almost bizarre to me, because I think most people that wanted the game would have already owned it on the Epic Games Store. So the fact that there is still over 300,000 people that didn't have the game already and have now got into it because of the Steam release is incredible. But speaking of going up, where does Chivalry 2 go from here exactly? Well, we have a few hints. So far on the roadmap that was released a few months back, Chivalry 2 have stated that there are still 2 more sections planned, or at least for now. They don't have names or any real details, but to be fair, when Tennosia was on the roadmap, it was only labeled as our biggest update yet, and it turned out they weren't lying at all. But what we do know is the introduction of crossplay between all platforms. I would assume not only Epic Games and Steam, because that's already in there, but Xbox and PlayStation as well. Also the mention of the potential cross-generation play for PS4 and PS5. New weapons, of course, will be expected, but also competitive play modes for the hardcore fans that want to play those skirmish or competitive modes for smaller team-based stuff. Something I think is more exciting is unofficial server support. It doesn't exist yet within the game, but being able to let players host their own servers with their own parameters, their own missions and events that they can do, whether they want to do private clan battles or host massive public games with these certain moddable abilities. This is something that is really important to add into a multiplayer title. And all these updates are things that are still planned to come out for free. Chivalry 2's last year has been incredibly prosperous, not only for the developers, but more importantly, the fans and the people playing it. We have had so much extra content releasing in such fast succession that sometimes it even feels hard to catch up with it myself. Without paying an extra penny, we've had almost 8 full new maps from the release and a whole new faction, countless numbers of weapons and armors, and a completely new mechanic in cavalry and horse riding. It gets better and better with each update, and I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. But only the future really knows what's next for the title, and perhaps a larger franchise later on as time passes. But I guess we'll find out another year later after the release of Chivalry 2. Feeling of it total.